Good evening and welcome to ASI Presents VFR into IMC Avoidance, Planning versus Executing, Sometimes a Catastrophic Gap. My name is John Collins. I'm the Manager of Aviation Safety Programs for the Air Safety Institute, and I'm a CFII and an MEI. I'll also be your presenter this evening. A few things before we get into the meat of the webinar. If you have any audio issues tonight, please try logging out and logging back in. We're unable to do any troubleshooting during the broadcast. We are recording this, so if you want to take a look at it later or share it with some of your friends, by all means, please do that. It will be available on both our Air Safety Institute webpage and also on our Air Safety Institute YouTube channel. And I'll have links for those later on in the broadcast. Wings credit is available for this evening's presentation. If you signed up using your FAAsafety.gov email address, you're automatically on our list to get that credit. If you don't know if you signed up with that address or if you can't recall, then by all means submit it to us using the question feature. You can access that by clicking on the question mark located on your control panel, generally at the top of your screen on a PC or laptop, and on the side of the screen if you're using an iPad or other display. And just go ahead, click on that, and then you can type your email in there. We'll be sure to add it to our list. Also, at the end of the webinar, I will tell you how you can get your AOPA Pilot Passport webinar badge. So stick around for that. So now let's get into our topic. Over the last few years, we've done a really good job of improving our safety in general aviation. In fact, fiscal year 2021 was our safest year yet. And you can see there that we have a 0.74 fatal accident rate versus 1,000 hours of flight. And we flew about 22,000 hours in fiscal year 2021. We'd like to think that it's possibly because people are consuming ASI safety material. You can see there about 12 million times it's been accessed annually. And we are on a variety of different channels: YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. We have a There I Was podcast, along with all the products that you're familiar with on the Air Safety Institute webpage. As we look at accidents and going back to 1989, you can see that we have decreased over the years from 480 in 1989 to 192 fatal accidents in 2021. So that's a pretty good decrease. And I'm happy to see it continuing down. It may be a little higher this year as we look at our fatal accident dashboard through the end of July of this year. You can see we're still well below the FAA's not to exceed marker, but we are slightly higher than we were last year at this time with 28 accidents over the course of the fiscal year versus 6 accidents month to month for July. So, but we're still, like I said, 30 accidents below that. So we'd like to try to keep that number low, and we're going to continue to work on it. What you're seeing here is the General Aviation Joint Safety Committee's top accident causes in general aviation. And you can see number 5 there is UIMC, or unintentional entry into IMC conditions. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. It is a very tenacious accident. In fact, it is the #1 weather-related accident cause. Above all others, it has the highest lethality. And we're going to show you some statistics related to that. And it's not just VFR-only pilots that get into trouble going into IMC unintentionally. IFR pilots are also part of that accident parameter. And so even though you have an instrument rating, it may not be current, or maybe you're not proficient with it. So you're still at risk if you unintentionally get into IMC. We're going to take a look at a recent case study. This is actually an accident that's still under investigation. So we don't have all the answers to it yet, but we have some lessons that we can pull out of there that we can talk about tonight. And we're going to talk about the human element involved in VFR and IMC accidents, both in planning and executing your missions. And then we'll talk about some prevention strategies at the end. So let's get started with a definition of VFR into IMC. And this actually comes out of the FAA's Airplane Flying Handbook. And anytime you're unable to maintain airplane attitude control by reference to the natural horizon, the condition is considered to be IMC, regardless of the circumstances or the prevailing weather conditions. So even though it is a VFR day out, it may be hazy, you might be flying into the sun, that's still a potential IMC condition for you. These situations should be accepted by the pilot involved as a genuine emergency requiring appropriate action. Straight out of the FAA Airplane Flying Handbook, and that's good information to kind of put in the back of your mind so you think about this when you're tempted to get into a situation like this, or when you find yourself in a situation and you're trying to figure out what to do. It is an emergency. Go ahead and declare the emergency, get the help you need, land safely, get out of it. As we look back over VFR and the IMC accidents for a period of about 11 years from 2008 to 2018, we find that there were 261 fixed-wing non-commercial aircraft accidents that were caused by VFR and the IMC. Of those, 224 were fatal, an 86% lethality rate. For rotary wing non-commercial aircraft, there were 32 unintentional IMC accidents. That's how they code those. Of them, 20 were fatal. Again, a 63% lethality. And if you look at the latest data out of the Air Safety Institute NOAA report from looking at the 2019 accidents, you can see that 18 out of 19 of those accidents were fatal as well. So it is something that we're focusing on in the Air Safety Institute this year. We're trying to knock that number down. But there's more to it than just that, because over that same time period, there were 224 ASRS reports or NASA reports dealing with personal Part 91 VFR and IMC encounters. The same amount of accidents that occurred, the same amount of ASRS reports. So why did they survive? What's going on there? Are they quicker to realize the emergency? Do they take the action that they need to? Maybe they had better training, or perhaps it's good planning. Maybe they were just plain lucky. It's kind of hard to tell, but as you read through those reports, you can get a sense of what they did and how they were able to get themselves out of those situations. And it's very good information to take a look at and try to draw some conclusions from. But again, why are there so many? Well, it's a little bit ambiguous. I mean, there's often no clear dividing line. All of a sudden you're VFR and then all of a sudden right into IMC. That doesn't happen. It sneaks up on you. You're taking off perhaps, and you're not noticing that the weather is slowly deteriorating as you go further along into your flight. You know, you're pushing on in hopes of better weather. Perhaps you were looking at the forecast, and the forecast indicated it's going to get better as we go along our route of flight. That might not always be the case. So there may be an underappreciation for the risk. And if you're a new pilot, you might not understand the danger. But don't forget, older pilots get affected by this too. Pilots that have experience. And why? Well, they're a little bit complacent, perhaps. They got away with it before. Oh, I've seen this. It'll clear up. I'll be good as I get down the line there. I'll be fine. I've gotten out of certain similar situations like this before. I should be okay. So, you know, those are some of the reasons why we see a lot of these accidents occurring and why we see a very high lethality rate for them. So let's take a look at this accident case study. Again, as I said, this is based on a preliminary report from the NTSB, and we're talking about a case that occurred back in December of 2021. This is a flight of 2 aircraft. The accident pilot was a non-instrument rated private pilot, has had this certificate since July of 2004, about 55 years old with a 3rd class medical. The flight occurred December 3rd, 2021. And they took off in the early evening, about 6:23 p.m. local time. It was a flight of 2, a Bonanza and a Cessna 182. It was the Bonanza that actually crashed. The intended route was going from Minden Airport, Louisiana, up to Clarksville, Arkansas. And you can see the route of flight there, pretty much a straight north shot. They did have an alternate, and that's highlighted in the red circle on that chart, Ralph C. Weiser Field in Magnolia, Arkansas. So they had looked at some of the information and had made some preliminary decisions, and we'll take a look at that here in a moment. A little bit more about the weather conditions. It was a moonless night. There were clouds, layers 1,500 feet that were scattered, and then it was overcast at 2,000 feet above that. Visibility was reported as good, 10 miles visibility, and the temperature and the dew point were within a 3-degree spread of each other. But both pilots were aware of the potential hazards that could occur as that dew point and temperature got closer and closer, and they considered not going. They actually looked at the information and tried to figure out what they could do, and they developed this diversion plan that they would go about 35 miles, and if they didn't like it, they would land and not continue the flight. Now, we don't know why they were making this flight and what was driving them to do that. Hopefully we'll get some of that when the final report comes out in about a year. And the accident occurred well into the flight. Again, both were VFR rated pilots, no instrument rating. They're flying along, it's a night flight, and they're flying into rising terrain. The clouds start to become lower than expected. That 1,500-foot scatter layer starts to thicken up. The 2,000-foot layer starts to come down. Visibility starts to decrease, and they're continuing on into deepening IMC conditions. The lead pilot in Bonanza, he ends up making a descending turn off course into terrain. You can see the course line charted there on the right, and then the accident site on Trap Mountain is off to the left there. We think there may be some spatial disorientation involved with that, and so that is something that occurred. There was a single fatality, unfortunately. The trail pilot was flying along and noticed that the accident pilot was starting to make a turn and attempted to reach him via the radio, but was unsuccessful. And as he was continuing along, he was again trying to stay below the clouds and got a low altitude alert on his iPad. And so he climbed up to an altitude that kept him well above the terrain, but put him back into IMC conditions. And so he continued along his route of flight until he popped out of IMC much closer to the destination. So flying again in instrument conditions for over an hour as a non-instrument rated pilot. So what went wrong? What happened that these pilots made this decision to go fly? What happened to the accident pilot? What do we think happened? Because again, we don't know for sure at the moment, but we can take a look at some of the information that we've got and see what's going on here. So there were some warning signs. Our pilots in this accident, they had information, they looked at it, they assessed it, looking at METARs, TAFs, radar images, they got weather briefings. The risks were clear. Before the flight, they were looking at a marginal weather situation. Again, temperature dew point within 3 degrees, that is a red flag, particularly as they start to decrease and they get closer and closer, where you're going to lose visibility and you're going to have clouds forming, and then a moonless night, flying into the rising terrain and not being instrumented. Those were all the risks that they had to try to mitigate ahead of the flight. So as they launched and they got into the flight, the weather was worse than anticipated. So they had put together something of a plan before they departed. And again, a plan is based on assumptions, and we know a little bit about what they were assuming, but we don't know everything. So the plan was they would take off, they would climb to 1,500 feet MSL, they'd continue along their route of flight. They were expecting clearing skies farther north. They got that information from the weather reports. If they needed to, they would divert to KAGO if the clouds got too low. And as they got along in their flight, we're going to see that the clouds did get too low. But one thing about plans, particularly if you're making a plan to have an abort or have a no-go or a diversion, you have to have the discipline to execute that plan. So when you're making the plan, if you decide you're going to go, if you've got an abort point, if you're going to make a diversion, you have to stick to that plan if you're going to pull that trigger on it. Candidly, these pilots were asking a lot of themselves to go on this flight, and it's going to require a lot of discipline to execute that abort criteria. And particularly when you're flying in a formation, you're not there in the same cockpit to talk to each other to discuss what do you need to do. It may be difficult to have that conversation and to make the right decisions for it. So at takeoff, the weather was worse than expected, but they still pressed on because it wasn't supposed to be that bad. So they thought it was going to get better, they would get out of the weather and it would open up for them and they'd be able to continue along their route of flight. Unfortunately, it was just the opposite. They're flying into worsening weather and they're pressing on hoping that it's going to get better. Folks, hope is not a strategy. It can't be. You need to use solid facts and analyze them and make that decision to either not go or to divert or to turn around. So they pressed on, and then the lead pilot, like we said, we think there was some spatial disorientation present and got involved in that and started a descending turn that ultimately ended up with the airplane crashing into the mountain. The other pilot climbed and that saved his life. And we've seen that when we read through some of the ASRS reports. where pilots have climbed up into the clouds, and sometimes they've climbed up through the clouds and gotten up on top into VFR conditions, been able to carry on with their flight. Sometimes they've carried on in IFR conditions in the clouds in IMC and have contacted ATC to get help and get out of there. So this gentleman did a straight ahead climb, kept his wings level, got up to an altitude where he kept himself clear of terrain and was able to complete his flight safely. Let's talk a little bit about the human element. As you can see here from this, this case, these pilots had a very strong continuation bias. They had made a plan, they were going to execute the plan, and they wanted to carry on with their flight. And so that's based on two things. There's a confirmation bias, which is seeing what we want to see. As we read through the weather reports, as we look at the forecast, we're going to see improving weather, and we're going to focus on that. And then the expectation bias is we see what we expect to see. So we think we're going to see that when we get out there and we fly. So when we make that first decision, and any of us that have made a decision where we know we're going to stick to it, and I think that's all of us, you can look at, it doesn't have to be an aviation related decision, but any decision, that first decision is powerful, and you become very reluctant to reconsider it, even in the face sometimes of conflicting information. And so you may tend to exaggerate the facts that support that decision. Well, I see that it's going to get better. Look, I see that our destination has VFR weather. It will be VFR when we get there. Never mind that there are other airports around us that are reporting worsening weather. Never mind that you know, we can see outside that we're going to take off into poor weather. So, you know, we'll exaggerate those facts, and then we'll get rid of the facts that don't support our plan and indicate that we should reconsider it. And that is where we need to start looking for red flags and what can we do to, you know, be a little more cautious and analyze that risk a little bit more, mitigate what we can. And if we can't mitigate those risks, then don't go. You know, one of my personal minimums is there is no flight in general aviation that I have to make. I don't have to take off. I don't have to go. If I don't like what I'm looking at as I read through the weather reports, I'm not going to go. If I have questions about it, if I think I need to call my friends in my weather circle and bounce it off of them, there's probably a pretty good reason I don't need to go, and I'll wait. And I've done that a few times. Has it cost me some flights? Yes. Has it cost me some family support sometimes? Occasionally, sure. You know, they're counting on going to grandma's house. They're counting on going to the vacation, and dad has just thrown a little wrinkle into it. Okay, I've got thick skin. I can live with that. You know, I'd rather get them there safely, whether it's driving or whether it's flying the next day in VFR conditions, good VFR conditions. I'd rather do that. Well, what about just going up and taking a look? Well, again, you've gotten into the airplane, you've prepped it, you've pre-flighted, you've done all that, you've taken off, and now you're up there taking a look. It's very difficult sometimes to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with what I see. We're gonna go back. Particularly if you have passengers with you that are egging you on to go on that trip. You know, you have that momentum. You're making an assumption that things are going to get better, and you're going to rationalize that and justify. Well, you know, I've seen weather like this before. I'm a good pilot. I can get through it. You know, I've got an instrument rating. It may not be current, but I know what to do if we get into trouble, and I can get us out of that. You know what? With my family on board, I'm not going to take that risk. I don't think I'm going to go up and take a look. The times that I have gone up and taken a look, it's been a difficult decision to get back down on the ground, but I've made that decision to come back. You know, and you know, your odds of making it out of there alive, if you've lost spatial awareness, you get disoriented, it gets very difficult very quickly to come out of that and to recover and to you know, land safely, or you know, get to a point where you can land safely. So let's talk about some prevention strategies about this. First of all, ask yourself, is the flight under these particular conditions worth the risk? You know, if you analyze the risk, if you look at all the factors, you know, in this accident case, it was the end of the day, it was getting into night, there was no moon or a solid cloud layer above them, you know, is it worth that risk? They analyzed it and said yes. Well, what if I end up in an IMC? Am I going to turn around, or am I going to fly an approach? I have a couple of VFR to IMC scenarios that have occurred in my own personal flying. One of them, I was ferrying an airplane from Martinsburg, West Virginia, up the road to Hagerstown, Maryland. So it's a flight of about 25 nautical miles, give or take. I was working for a flight school at the time. I was one of their flight instructors, and the airplane needed an oil change, and our maintenance facility was up in Hagerstown. So the boss said, "Hey, John, go fly that airplane, take it up to Hagerstown." I had looked at the weather first thing in the morning when I came in. I didn't see anything that would give me any pause. It was, I don't know, December, I guess, mid-December. So it was a little cloudy out. There were a few reports of scattered snow squalls, but I didn't really think anything of that. So I launched, and I'm following Interstate 81 up. And about halfway between Hagerstown and Martinsburg, I run into some pretty solid snow. I can't see a way to get around it. I don't have charts with me. This is in 1996 or 97, so pre-GPS, pre-iPad, pre-4Flight, all that sort of thing. No onboard weather, no data link weather. So I made the decision, you know what, I'm going to just do a 180 and go back to the airport. My boss was a little surprised to see me, but once I explained to him why I came back, he said, all right, well, let's get it up there tomorrow. I'm like, okay, no problem. One of the things you want to think about pre-flight is what are my bailout options along the route if I do go. So, you know, our accident pilots, they had one, they continued past that, but, you know, maybe they should have added some other ones, and maybe we could have look at further airports along the route and decide, do we want to land there? Do we want to turn around? Do we want to divert and land? Do we want to go to an airport that has, you know, a control tower and has lighting and has all the rest of the things we might need to get in during a let me go back here, during a VFR into IMC event? Do I have access to air traffic control? What's the worst that could happen if I don't go? Remember, I said I've made a number of decisions. I'm sure many of you have as well. What's the worst that happens if I don't go? Disappointed family. Maybe I have to reschedule a meeting. Maybe I have to talk to the client via phone or via, you know, a Zoom call instead. And compare that to the worst that could happen if I do go. Bent airplane, broken people, dead people. You know, is that really worth that risk? Is it really worth taking that flight to make that decision to go and to potentially put yourself into a VFR and IMC situation? Once you've considered all those things, you decide, okay, the risks, I've mitigated all the risks, I've done all my analysis, I've talked to my weather circle of friends that have said, yeah, we think this is a good idea, and you've not you know, hoped your way into a good flight. What happens if you get airborne and your things kind of go sideways with you? First of all, hopefully you're flying with flight following, because then you'll have instant access to ATC. You're already talking to them. You can get the help you need. If you're not using flight following, but you're paying attention to where you're flying, and maybe you know some of the local frequencies, or you can find the frequencies rather quickly via a tablet or other publication, the chart supplement, whatever you need, the chart itself, maybe you can get some help that way. You know, you can always, of course, if you need instant access to ATC, get up on 121.5 and send out an emergency call. You know, let them know, hey, I need some help. Here's where I am, and get some specific help for you. Set some trigger points at which you'll take action. Now, those might be getting to a certain location. Those might be things like the clouds are getting lower and they're now 2,000 feet AGL, and I know I have rising terrain ahead of me. So if the clouds get to 2,000 feet and I'm in that rising terrain, I'm going to turn around. Or perhaps you can think about, you know, visibility. If the visibility starts to decrease, I'm going to make a decision to do something, whether it's turn around, whether it's land. You know, the thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you take that action if you reach those trigger points, and write them down and brief them to your passengers, and then have them help keep you accountable. Particularly if you're flying with another pilot, that helps. And that also makes them part of the decision-making process, which I think is very important as well, because they need to have some buy-in to what you're planning on doing with them. Avoid that might be better ahead thinking. You can't fall into that trap. Well, it's going to be better ahead. It looks like everything's going to be better ahead, particularly if you find yourself just focusing on one or two things that indicate that and ignoring other information that is actually pointing towards a different scenario for you. And then realize the difficulty that you're going to have in recovering once you've lost spatial awareness. You need to focus on that attitude indicator. You need to believe what it's telling you, regardless of what your ears might be telling you or what your seat might be telling you. You need to look at that attitude indicator, fly the instruments, and get yourself to level flight, and then get help and get out of that situation. So for years and years and years, we've taught to make a 180-degree turn to get out of IMC. And actually, if you read through the Airplane Flying Handbook, you read in the section on VFR into IMC, the FAA considers that to be a dangerous maneuver. There's a tendency, particularly in a stressful situation, to over control. How many of us have tightened our grip on the control yoke when we get stressed, when we're getting overwhelmed with what's going on? Instead of remaining with 2 fingers on the thumb, light pressure, like I was telling my primary students today, light pressure is going to make you more sensitive to what the airplane is doing versus wrapping your whole hand around it and holding on for dear life. You need to let go and just feel what the airplane's doing and do not over control it. It is harder in real life when you're in the actual clouds than it is when you're under the hood. And so if you have never experienced flight in the clouds, by all means, grab a double eye or grab an instrument-rated pilot current and ask them to take you into the clouds so you can see what that looks like, see what it feels like, and experience the rush as you go into a cloud. There's some very real phenomena that occur when you do that. And so the light looks different. You're seeing the clouds move past you on in the windshield. If you glance up, it's not like being under the hood. We've talked about when in the training we talk about using a standard rate turn, and so that's somewhere between 15 to 18 degrees of bank, depends on your airplane and how fast you're going. And if you're using your turn coordinator, then you just put the wing on the tick mark and you hold that going around, and that's probably going to work. But you might want to try a 10-degree bank. That might be more practical for you. And if you have to make that large change, more than 180 degrees, then break it up into a series of small turns. Make the turn, return to level flight, make the turn again, and continue until you find yourself either turn around and out of the situation or turn to a heading that ATC has told you to turn to. And again, consider climbing straight and level, straight ahead and level the wing, not turning. Make sure that you don't try to do 2 things at once. If you're talking to ATC and they ask you to do 2 things at once, tell them, no, I want to do 1 maneuver at a time. As long as there's not something out there that you're going to run into, then they can see that. Hopefully we'll be able to let you know if you're getting into a more rising terrain and turn you away. There's a good video out there where there's a ATC out in Seattle Center is talking to a 150 that's in the clouds, in the mountains, and they're trying to get him out. And they're trying to talk him out of the clouds, and he's starting to descend. They're telling him, no, don't descend yet. We need you to go a little bit further before we let you descend. There's mountains ahead of you that you need to clear. So they're trying to give him good information there. And then, of course, if you have an autopilot in your airplane and you know how to use it, and that's key there, making sure you understand how to use the autopilot, by all means, go ahead and do that. Turn that on, let that help you fly the airplane out of IMC. One thing we haven't talked about is an off-airport landing. It is a valid option. If you find yourself in worsening weather conditions, you're not near an airport, but you have a good landing spot near you, by all means, go ahead and do that. The accident record shows that the aircraft damage for a planned off-airport landing is usually minor, typically little or no injuries. But you'll need to make that decision early and choose a good location. And remember, all roads have wires. So if you're planning on landing on a road, look for the wires. If you're landing in a field, look for wires. Look for hay bales. Look for animals. Look for other features that might make your decision for one field over another a little bit easier. Okay, I've got a good open field here. It's relatively into the wind. There's no ditches. There's no roads. There's no animals. Go ahead and land there. Once you're on the ground, then you can start to figure out how you're going to get in contact with somebody and get yourself out of that situation. But at least you're on the ground and alive to be able to do that versus in the air trying to figure it out possibly getting into the clouds, getting spatially disoriented, coming out of the clouds in a really weird attitude with only a moment or two before you crash into the ground. So they don't want to be gloomy about it, but definitely want to say, look, take the time, get yourself on the ground. That's not a bad option sometimes. So some things to take away from this presentation: unintentional VFR into IMC is definitely dangerous for both VFR and IFR pilots. The accident record shows that. Having an instrument rating is not a cure-all for it, particularly if it is not current. And if it is current, if you're not proficient with it, definitely want to have that proficiency there. Go out, spend some time, go with a double I, go with a safety pilot, whatever you need to do, but keep that instrument rating current, and that will give you a little bit more help with that, getting out of that VFR and IMC scenario. You'll want to develop a solid plan with multiple outs, particularly if you've got some really questionable weather out in front of you and you're a VFR only pilot, whether you're instrument rated or not. Really take the time, spend the time in planning ahead of the flight. Look at all the options, weigh the decision of, can we delay it? Can we, can we only go so far and then land? What if things get worse before then? Have that in place and use your plan. And if you have abort, divert, and turn back, divert and turn back criteria, then by all means abide by those. I'm going to abort if I have, visibility drop below 5 miles or 3 miles. I was on a flight with a student. We were departing out of Martinsburg again, late afternoon. It was probably July. So late afternoon, hot, hazy day, very humid. And we had, 6 miles in haze reported for visibility. So it was VFR day, but we're headed west into the setting sun. And it wasn't all the way set yet. It was still fairly high in the sky, but into that sun, heading west, I think we were going to Petersburg that day. And it was a student, a VFR cross-country flight. And I said to my student, I said, what do you see out in front of you? And she said, well, not a whole lot. I'm like, okay. What do you see underneath you? Well, I can see the ground. I said, okay, that's good. Can you see anything back behind you? She said, yeah, it looks better behind us. And I asked her, I said, well, what do you want to do? And she thought about it for a moment. And she came back and said, well, I think I want to go back to the airport. I'm like, okay, that's a great decision. Let's turn around and go back. We were flying into an airport we had to cross several mountain ridges to get into it. It was down in a valley. It was getting hazier the further west we went. We probably would have been okay. But, she made a very good conscious decision to say, you know what, I'm going to turn around and we're going to go back to where we started from. We'll try this another day. So abide by your divert, abort, or turn back criteria, and acknowledge the fact that there is a strong momentum of the first decision. So if you make a decision to go fly into worsening weather, understand that you're going to try to complete that unless you have the discipline to override that and to say, no, I'm not going to do it. Again, taking a look, same thing. It's hard to come back once you go. You've already spent the time to do it. You're up there. It doesn't look as bad as I thought it was going to look like. I should be okay. I've seen this before. I can take care of it. I can do it. By all means, if you do get into trouble, ask ATC for help. They're there to help you out. They will be happy to help you out. They will give you the help you need. When you talk to them, you tell them you have an emergency, you're a VFR pilot, you're getting into IMC conditions, and you need to get out of there. And be plain. Talk to them in plain language. Don't try to be all, give them jargon. A lot of them aren't pilots, but they do understand the fact that you can't see outside your airplane. They do understand the fact that you need to go to the nearest VFR. They will ask you some questions about how much fuel you have on board, how many people are on board, that sort of thing, so you kind of get an idea of what they're dealing with, and then they will start to turn you towards their better weather or give you some options. And again, tell them what you can do. Okay, I'm going to stay level and I'm going to make a turn, or no, I need to climb. Okay, I'm going to climb straight ahead, then I'm going to make a turn. Talk to them and let them know what you want them to do. They will be more than happy to help you out. And is there paperwork involved with this? No, not usually. I think in all the cases that I've looked at, there hasn't been any paperwork related to an enforcement action. The ATC is actually very happy to get you out of that situation. That's a save for them. They've gotten you out of a dangerous situation and gotten you to safety, and they look at that as a win for them and a win for you. And there's not usually any repercussions involved with that. If you do encounter IMC, like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says, don't panic. Okay, relax, take a few deep breaths, focus on what you have to do. Go to your instruments, start reading your attitude indicator, look at that, look at some of the other instruments to verify the information you're seeing there, and consider that a straight ahead climb may be safer than a turn back. I know there are a lot of folks say, well, you can make a 180-degree turn, you may turn into worsening weather behind you, and that's actually true. You might get into worse weather behind you. It's closing in behind you. If you didn't read the weather correctly and understand what's going on there, you may find yourself in that situation. And a climb straight ahead might take you away from terrain, get you higher so you can talk to ATC, and give you a few more options to be able to figure out what's going on. ASI has a couple of very good VFR into IMC resources that I'd like to point you towards. First of all, we have our Safety Spotlight, which kind of takes you through more information related to flying, avoiding VFR into IMC flight. And that's located on our webpage. Just look for Safety Spotlights and VFR into IMC. Our VFR into IMC Safety Center is a collection of links to other resources, both AOPA and others, related to VFR into IMC. And we also just came out at the beginning of the month with our updated VFR into IMC avoidance training syllabus. I'd encourage you to take a look at that as well. So that brings us to our question and answer time, and I have hidden behind me Paul Darris, who is our director at ASI, and he's been doing the question triage for me. Paul, do we have any questions from the audience tonight?
Hi, John. We do have one question from Randy.
Okay.
He's asking, in addition to communicating with ATC via 121.5, should I also squawk 7700 or wait for ATC to request I do that?
That's a good question. And Randy, I would say that if you haven't gotten a response on 121.5, you could certainly squawk 7700. That's going to light up their screens for sure, and they'll see where you're at. They may try to figure out who they're trying to talk to. But if you've been able to get in contact with them on 121.5, I would not make a transponder change until they ask you to make a transponder change to a specific discrete transponder code.
And those are the only questions we have so far. So if you want to stand by for a minute or two, we can wait to see if others come in.
All right. Well, while we're waiting, just a reminder for folks, we've got a few things coming up. Our next webinar will be on September 15th, about a month away. This will be the third episode in our NTSB Insider series. It's a little bit secret right now, so I'm not going to reveal anything, but if you've registered for our NTSB Insider webinars, either the first one or the second one, you're already registered for episode 3. If you haven't registered for any of the NTSB Insider webinars, then I would encourage you to go onto our webpage, go to the airsafetyinstitute.org page and click on webinars, and you'll see our various series. You can subscribe to any of those. As a reminder, Wings credit is available for the webinar. We will have it in your account by Monday afternoon. Scout's promise, Scout's honor. If you're not sure you signed up with the FAAsafety.gov email, then by all means you can put it in our question and answer block here on the webinar, or you can email us at safety@aopa.org, and we'll make sure to add you to the list. Just let us know that you watched this webinar. If you want to watch it again, if you want to share it with your pilot group or your flying club or what have you, by all means, we will have this up on our ASI YouTube channel and also on our webinars page, which is webinars.aopa.org. And also, again, through the Air Safety Institute page on that webinars page, you can watch any of our back episodes of the ASI safety webinars that we've done this year, and I think back into 2021 as well. If you want to add this webinar to your ASI transcript and get a certificate of completion, Please use this URL in your browser, bit.ly/wxflying2 cert, and that will take you to our Air Safety Institute transcript page where you can just enter your information, and that will generate that certificate of completion for you and add it to your ASI transcript. So you'll get it both on your ASI transcript, and then we'll put it into your wings transcript as well if you're doing the FAA wings program, which I would highly encourage you to do that. It helps out a lot. Not only does it help you stay current and proficient, but it also, completion of a phase of the wings program resets your flight review calendar. So you get another 24 months before you have to do that. If you use the AOPA app, our pilot passport is part of that app. So if you go to the AOPA app, if you look over here on where it's items 1 or 2, that's the easy one. Item 1, you can click right into the pilot passport. Item 2, that's actually the menu. If you click on that and then click on pilot passport. Number 3 is where you want to click when that finally shows up. It's my pilot passport. And when that opens up, you'll see a page that says my points and badges. And you'll see all the points, all the badges that you've earned. But the thing that you want to look at, scroll down the page a little ways and you'll see the affiliate badge code or affiliate codes highlighted there by item number 4. Go ahead and click on that. That will open the next page, and then you can redeem the affiliate code by entering ASI Web 081822. ASI Web 081822 into the field there, and then click the green bar, and you've got the badge and 1,000 points. You jump up in the leaderboard a little bit, add another badge to your collection. Hopefully you're participating in that. Any other questions, Paul, coming in?
Yeah, we got a few more trickled in, so let's go ahead. I got a few more here. Let's get one from Thomas. He's asking, I'm a very new private pilot and not instrument rated, and I've trained beyond what was needed for the private pilot. I feel like I'm too cautious, canceling flights due to tasks or segments that are iffy that in hindsight would have been fine. Is it better to be overcautious than not cautious enough, or should I be a bit braver as my experience progresses?
That's an awesome question. You need to expand your experience envelope a little bit, Thomas. And I would say in those situations, don't ever regret a decision that you made that's kept you on the ground and not flying, but learn from it. If there was something that you looked at that maybe you missed in reading the weather reports, reading the forecasts, or looking at some of the graphical information online, by all means, try to use that. And I would talk again. I'm not your flight instructor. I am a flight instructor. Give him a call or her a call and ask the question. Hey, here's what I did. What do you think? Or if you think you want to make that flight and you want a little extra insurance to go along with you, get the CFI to go with you or a more experienced pilot. It's good to. That's the word I'm looking for here. It's good to expand your flying experience and your envelope, but you do want to make sure that you're not going to put yourself in a situation where you've exceeded your capabilities or your aircraft's capabilities. So yes, you want to kind of branch out a little bit. Have a good plan. Have a good plan B. Have a good plan C. I made a flight one time where I was coming back and I thought I could outclimb clouds in a 152. No. I ended up going right into them. Fortunately, I was instrument rated, current, and had charts with me. So I was able to make the flight. But as I got into the clouds, I found myself in a developing thunderstorm, and I'm seeing lightning fly all around me. And I called ATC and said, you know what? I want to be on the ground now. Don't hesitate to call for help when you need it, and the earlier the better. So yes, by all means, start to expand your limitations and your limits. Hopefully you're using a personal minimums form of some sort. We've got one in ASI, the FAA has one, and I would go through and look at that, and I would sit down with your flight instructor and put that together and kind of say, okay, this is build the framework around which you want to fly in. As you gain more experience, that's going to get larger. As perhaps time goes on and you find life interfering with your ability to get out and fly more, that might shrink down a little bit. So I always tell people, when you fill out your personal minimums, do it in pencil, sign it in ink so that you don't pay for it in blood. And if you fly with somebody on a regular basis, let's say you have a spouse, a friend with flying benefits, somebody that likes to be self-loading baggage for you, whatever, involve them in the flight planning, involve them in the setting of the limitations. And the story I like to tell about that is, Paul and I had a boss one time who was an experienced fighter pilot, naval fighter pilot, but he never flew at night. And the reason for that is his wife, wow, hit the wrong button there. His wife didn't like flying at night. So they were on the ground at dusk, no matter what. And that was because the person he flew with the most didn't like flying at night, didn't like flying at night over the mountains, didn't like flying at night at all. The irony in that is that when he left AOP, he's now flying for a major freight carrier, and he does most of his flying at night. But he had a lot of experience as a naval fighter pilot, and lots of night flying time there. But when he flew GA, he made that limitation on his personal minimums. Any other questions, Paul?
Yeah, we have one from Elliot. He's asking, can you please describe a typical call up to ATC on 120.5 if you have blundered into IMC?
If you know who you're talking to, you can try to identify them if you think you know what sector you're in. Washington Center or Potomac Tracon. But if you don't know, then it's appropriate just to start the call. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cessna 12345. I'm a Cessna 172 at 4,000 feet, 40 miles west of Frederick. I'm in the clouds. I'm a VFR only pilot. I need help. I need to get to the nearest VFR and see what comes back, and then wait to hear it. You probably have somebody answer you fairly quickly, particularly if you give a location so that they can kind of try to find you a little bit better. But if you just come up on the frequency and you're overwhelmed, mayday, 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 Cessna 12345, VFR pilot, I'm in the clouds, I need help, somebody's going to come back and they're going to start to try to figure out where you're at. If you can give them a little more information so they know where you're at, that's good. Again, like the earlier member asked, should I squawk 7700? Yeah, you could certainly squawk 7700, and that will light you up on their screen, and they'll be able to figure out where you're at and start talking to you. And if the controller, I sat down with the NACA guys out at AirVenture and had a really great conversation with them. And one of the things they said is like, when you call in and you're talking to them, what you don't see behind the guy that you're talking to is everybody else in the center or in the TRACON or whatever in the facility. There's a supervisor involved. If the controller is not a pilot, they're probably trying to find another controller who is a pilot so that they can talk our language and they can give you some comfort and some reassurance, or pass that along to the controller who's talking to you. There's a whole support system there that you've just energized by making that call and getting that assistance. And again, there's no penalty for doing that. That's their job. That's what they're paid to do, is to keep us safe up there and to help us when we need help. Even if we're just a VFR pilot, the system is out there and it facilitates the commercial airspace. It facilitates, the commercial aviation going from point A to point B, but it also helps out VFR aircraft that are also going point A to point B when we need the help. And if we need help, ask for it. Don't hesitate. By all means, declare that emergency. Yes, air traffic control can declare an emergency for you if they're talking to you and they feel you're kind of in trouble. Don't try to hide it from them. Be open and honest. Say, look, you know what? I blundered into a cloud. I'm disoriented. I'm lost. I don't know where I'm at. I need to get out of here. They'll tell you. They'll give you instructions. Maintain wings level. Hold this heading. All right. Now we're going to make you turn. We're going to ask you to turn right. To heading of 240. You've gone too far. Level your wings. Maintain your altitude. You're low. You're letting your altitude get back up to altitude. They'll give you instructions. They'll try to help you out. There is training for controllers in dealing with these types of situations. and they're working on getting better with that all the time. So by all means, reach out, ask for help.
Great. John, we got one more question for tonight. I might take a spin on this one too. Steve's asking about foggles, how it's easy to cheat with them, and what's a more effective method. Can you please talk to this, John, about really the part I want you to talk about is the downside of using any kind of view limiting device in flight, because that's not the reality of VFR IMC, where that condition is very subtle and insidious. Can you talk more about that?
So there's yeah, it's you know, putting the foggles on, you're right. You can absolutely cheat even with the best pair of foggles, even with something that wraps all the way around your head and kind of focuses you in only on the instrument panel. It's not realistic, because now you're getting tunnel vision and you're just looking at what's in front of you. You're not seeing, like I was talking about earlier, the changing shapes of the cloud, the colors, the light passes. Oh wait, I think that might be, I see blue, I can get through there. Probably not. You know, it is very difficult to do that. There are, I think, some products that are coming out onto the market. I've seen some ads for them. I've not had a chance to fly with them yet, but they have some sort of simulation that kind of gives you a little bit better feel for what flying in the clouds might actually be like. And again, one of the best ways to learn how to fly in the clouds is to actually go fly in the clouds and go get that instruction and learn how to do it safely. Paul, you wanted to add something to that?
No, I just wanted you to expand on what you just mentioned. So that was good. Thank you.
Okay.
And while you're answering that question, a few more did pop in. So if we have time, we'll take.
Sure, yeah, we can do
that. If we can. Let's see here. Here's one here. Actually, it's a tip from Kenneth Swain. He's suggesting that don't forget about autopilot usage. If you get stuck in IMC, it's a good tip there. Thank you, Ken, for that. Let's see, going down the line here. David asking, what has been the experience in using a virtual view like ForeFlight if you're caught IMC?
So that's a tool that's definitely available to help. And I would, if you have that and you're familiar with using it, that probably would be a good way to help get yourself out of a bad situation. If you've never played with it, I would probably not recommend trying to use it during an actual emergency. So if you've got that, if you've got that level of subscription to ForeFlight where you get that virtual view, by all means, go out, fly with a safety pilot so that you can play with that on your iPad and learn what it's going to look like, and put it in a position where you can use that and try to stay away from obstructions in the ground and things like that. Yeah, I would say that's a really good tool if you know how to use it.
Great. And it looks like, John, we can go real quick here. I think we're about done. Let me double check. Yeah, I think we're all set, John. So good show, and thanks everyone for your questions. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Definitely want to thank you guys for coming. As you know, ASI Safety Education is funded primarily by contributions from pilots like you, from enthusiasts. If you'd like to help, AOPAfoundation.org is the place where you can make donations, and we'd highly encourage you to do that. We'd love to get those in. Not only can you donate to the Air Safety Institute, but also to the You Can Fly programs. Both of those are funded through the AOPA Foundation. If you like this webinar and you're not already an AOPA member, I'd highly encourage you to become one. Go to aopa.org/join today and join the largest gathering of general aviation pilots in the world, largest association. We'd love to have you as a member. And that gets you all kinds of neat things, including very, very good award-winning magazines, AOPA Pilot, Flight Training Magazine, CFI to CFI newsletter. If you're a flight instructor, we'd highly encourage you to subscribe to that. AOPA.org/join today, and you can take advantage of all those member benefits. On behalf of Paul, myself, the rest of the Air Safety Institute, I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight and watching our webinar. Appreciate it. Hopefully this has helped you, and you will feel more confident and safer when you go out and fly, and you won't make a poor decision to continue VFR into IMC. And if you do find yourself getting into IMC, you have some skills that you can go and practice to get yourself out of it. You see on the screen our logo, Principles for Safe Flight Operations. If you take a well-trained pilot and you train them to proficiency, and you give them good equipment to fly in and a culture of safety, then you'll have a safe flight operation. So have a good evening and fly safe.